Spring is right around the corner, so if you're getting ready to plant, I have some great tips that will save you time, money, and frustration. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy, and over at prettypurpledoor.com, I help home gardeners design landscapes that are uniquely you. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make in the spring is rushing into planting without a plan. And I get it, I have been there too, buying a cart full of plants that look amazing at the nursery only to get home and have zero idea where I'm going to put them. My first tip is to learn your garden style. First, it's important to nail down your style, whether you love a classic cottage garden look with overflowing and billowing flowers, or you prefer a more modern or minimalist landscape. Knowing this will help you choose plants that actually will work together in your space instead of just looking random and like you went to the nursery without any plan and just picked a bunch of stuff and stuck it together. If you're really not sure what your garden style is, I do have a whole video that walks you through different styles so you can find the perfect one for you, and I'm going to link that below for you so you can watch that next. In addition to knowing your general garden style, I really encourage you to take some time to research gardens that you love. I'm surprised by how many of my students actually don't do this step, and just going on Pinterest or Houzz or Googling some ideas, you can put together a grouping of different gardens that you really love and get inspired by what other people are doing. Some things to ask yourself are, what colors are you drawn to? Do you prefer a more structured or formal look, or something more wild and natural? Do you like your plants tightly planted, or do you like to have space in between them with mulch? What are some other structural elements that you can add to make your landscape unique, like arbors or fountains or statues? What about hardscaping and pathways and patios, and what materials you might be drawn to for those? How can you really bring out your true unique style beyond just labeling your garden as naturalistic, cottage, traditional, or modern? There are lots of different sub-styles that you can kind of fit yourself into, or you can create something completely unique to you, but it really first starts with you gathering some inspiration and going from there. This is exactly what I do in my garden style mood board workshop. I walk you through creating a vision for your landscape before you start planting, before you go shopping. In the workshop, we go through all different exercises so that you can get really clear on your unique vision for your garden. And I show you how to take all of those elements and combine them into a really cohesive and interesting space. By the end of it, you have your mood board on one piece of paper. You can even print that out and bring it to the garden center with you when you're shopping. And it just makes things really clear and really easy to implement in the future. So if you're interested in that workshop, I'm going to leave a link below this video in the description. You can check that out. In the spring, timing is really everything. Spring is tricky because the weather can be just about all over the place. If you plant too early, you risk a late frost killing your seeds. If you plant too late, your plants might not have time to establish before summer heat kicks in. So a good rule of thumb is to check your last frost date and wait until the soil has warmed up a bit before you start planting. If you're eager to get started, you could always start seeds indoors or use cold frames to extend your growing season. The Farmer's Almanac website is actually a really great tool for this. And just remember to check the date each year because your last frost date can change from year to year. So in the example on the screen here, I just threw in a zip code 16802. And for this zip code, the last predicted spring frost is April 27th. So you'll want to plan your planting after that last frost date. And remember that this is just a prediction. It's not set in stone. Some people like to wait a few weeks beyond this date. So maybe 2 weeks after April 27th. Personally, I just like to check the extended weather forecast once that date gets a little bit close to see if there's any potential for frost in the coming weeks. If the temps are looking good, you're usually okay to plant. If you don't do this and you happen to plant and then you get a frost, all you'll have to do is just protect all of those plants. So if you're planting a lot, you're going to have a lot of work ahead of you to protect all of your plants from frost, or they're going to die when that frost hits. So this is a really important step in the spring. My next tip is to prep your soil first. Healthy plants obviously start with healthy soil. So before you start planting, take a few minutes to loosen your soil, remove any weeds, mix in compost or any other amendments that your soil may need. If your soil is too compacted, the roots won't be able to spread and your plants are going to struggle. You should also avoid working with soil that's too wet. In the spring, this is really important. It can compact and then it can make it a lot harder for your roots to grow in. A good test best is just to grab a handful of soil in your hand and squeeze it. If water is dripping out of your hand, it's too wet to plant, and you might need to wait for that soil to dry out a little bit to give your plants the best start. I absolutely love using bulbs, especially in spring planting, but unfortunately, if you haven't planted your bulbs in the fall, you won't have any for spring. So my suggestion here is just to observe spring bulbs this year, and then you can buy them and plant them in the fall so you can enjoy them next year. So now is a great time to take notes. Take a walk around your neighborhood, look at the bulbs you love, like crocus, tulips, daffodils, alliums. Write down the ones that you really like and a little note so that you don't forget to purchase them in the fall and plant them. It's also really important to note that different varieties of bulbs bloom at different times. This is an absolute fantastic way to extend bloom times in your garden. So if you really like daffodils, do some research and plant ones that are early, mid, and late spring blooming. Different varieties will bloom at different times. I do this all the time. I love alliums in my garden, so I plan for different bloom seasons of the alliums, and I can go all the way from spring until nearly fall with all the different varieties of alliums there are, so I can have them all year. So take those notes. Don't forget to purchase next fall, and remember that different varieties bloom at different times, and you can combine them all together to really extend that bloom season. Another tip is just to loosen the roots of your plants before you plant. If you've ever pulled a plant out of a nursery pot and seen that tangled mess of roots circling around the bottom, like the picture on the screen here, that's what's called a root-bound plant. If you plant it like that, the roots will just keep circling around the plant pot, even though you put them into the soil, which can actually stunt the plant's growth. So the fix is actually really simple for this. Just gently loosen the roots with your fingers before you plant. If they're really, really tight, you can even make a few shallow cuts on the sides to encourage outward growth of your roots. A lot of people are very nervous about doing this, and plants are a lot more resilient than you think. I'll actually just grab and kind of pull from the bottom and spread those roots out a little bit. So once you loosen those roots, you'll want to dig a hole that's twice as wide as the root ball, but just the same height as the root ball, so just a little bit wider. That wider hole will help the roots establish faster and lead to healthier, stronger plants. This is also a great time to fertilize your new plants to make sure that they get off to a great start. Just know that all fertilizers are not created equal. I almost exclusively use Espoma products in my own gardens, and when I'm planting for other people, my favorite fertilizer for new plants is an Espoma product called Biotone. I purchased it locally, but here's what it looks like on the screen. This helps plants to develop strong roots without being too harsh and actually damaging or burning those roots. Once my plants are established, I like to use another Espoma product. It's called Plant Tone. This is a great general fertilizer. It works well for most flowers, shrubs, trees, and even vegetables. I find all of the Espoma products to be pretty good, so if you're looking for something specific, they have lots of different products in their fertilizer and plant food line. Watering might seem like a simple task, but how and when you water makes a big difference in the garden, especially in the spring. If you water shallowly and frequently, your plant roots will stay near the surface of the soil, making them weak and more dependent on daily watering. Instead, you should aim for deep and infrequent watering. This encourages roots to grow deeper into the soil, making your plants more drought resistant in the future. And the timing does matter to some extent. The general rule of thumb is to water in the morning. This allows your plants to absorb moisture in the beginning of the day before the heat of the day kicks in. And generally, it will help prevent fungal diseases that can develop when plants sit wet overnight. If you want to be even smarter about watering, consider a soaker hose or some kind of drip irrigation. It delivers water directly to the soil. It reduces evaporation and keeps the leaves of the plant dry, not to mention just saving a bunch of money on watering because you're getting that water directly where it needs to go. Mulch is also a great thing to add in the spring. It's a secret weapon for a low maintenance garden. A 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch in the spring does so much. It keeps the soil cool, it retains moisture, and it prevents weeds from taking over your garden. So mulch is always a great option. But one mistake I often see is when people pile mulch against the plant stems. This can actually trap moisture, and it could lead to rotting the stems and disease in the plant. So instead, keep the mulch a few inches away from the plant base to let the air circulate. Usually I will put all the mulch in, and then I'll go to each individual plant and just pull away a few inches from the stem so that that mulch is not touching the stems and doesn't lead to any rot. For mulch types, organic options like shredded bark, wood chips, or composted leaves are great because they break down over time and actually improve your soil and feed your plants. I would always avoid dyed or rubber mulches, which don't really add any nutrients to the soil and can cause a lot of problems because that dyed mulch, you don't really know where it came from or what it looked like before it was dyed to make it look pretty for you. A lot of them are recycled pallets, and they might have some chemicals in them that you're not aware of, so always try to use natural mulch when possible. Another option is just to avoid using wood mulch altogether, and this is my preferred option. I like to create a ground cover layer in my garden using plants. This works just the same and is a very functional layer of your landscape. So you can choose a pretty ground cover to fill in your beds and reduce weeds and just use that as a replacement for mulch. Or if you like a cottage or a naturalistic style, you can plant very tightly so that the plant foliage is shading the ground and keeping the roots of the plants cool. And then the plants are basically creating their own form of mulch and protection. Whether you use wood mulch or a ground cover or tight planting, mulching is really important and functional in the garden for moisture retention and keeping plants healthy, and of course, preventing weed pressure and kind of reducing maintenance for you. Another tip is to plan for continuous blooms. If you want flowers all season long, the trick is to mix early, mid, and late season bloomers. For example, early bloomers like crocus, daffodils, and hellebores can really kick off spring. Mid-season flowers like peonies, iris, alliums, they take over next. And finally, there's late bloomers like coneflower, rudbeckia, and sedum that can keep the flower show going from late spring and even into fall. And don't forget my earlier tip where different bulbs actually can have different blooming seasons. So doing that little bit of research up front to find out what types of bulbs you would need to extend their bloom time is also a great way to plant for continuous blooms and have a gorgeous garden that lasts all season long. One of my favorite tricks is actually layering bulbs and perennials together. So you can plant tulip bulbs beneath perennials like daylilies, for example. By the time that the tulip flowers fade, the daylily foliage is taking over and it's hiding that foliage of the dying bulbs, and also just makes your garden look really pretty, full, and beautiful without you having to do much maintenance. So when you plant any types of early blooming perennials in front of your bulbs, as that foliage is dying down on your bulbs, the foliage for the perennials is growing up and just hiding that little bit of mess and just creating more continuous blooming in your garden so you don't have those gaps. If you're interested in creating a garden with sequential blooming like this and all of the things I'm talking about, I have a complete step-by-step process for this inside of my Design Your 4-Season Garden course. It's a great way to learn how to do this, even if you have a small garden. It's especially helpful for garden lovers who are constantly changing their spaces. Having a process to go back to can help you to make smarter plant choices that will really enhance how your garden looks from one year to another. It doesn't have to be a one and done plan when you take my course. I've heard some people say that they want to keep adding and contributing to their garden over the years, so they don't want to take my course. And actually, my course is quite perfect for that scenario. I offer lifetime access to all of the course material, and you also get access to support and a private Facebook community. I have some students in that group that have been creating different garden beds for years now, whether they're on their own property or start helping friends. They'll post their plans in the group and they get feedback in there. So it's a great option for a one-time fee where you can get support that's ongoing throughout the years. And again, I'll leave a link to that in the description below if you're interested in checking it out. My next tip is to support any tall plants early in the season. Some plants will start out small and compact, but they quickly get really tall and they end up flopping down if they aren't supported early on. A few I can think of off the top of my head are peonies, dahlias, delphiniums, and even tomatoes if you're a vegetable garden. They're classic examples. If you wait until they're already falling over, you're just risking breaking the stems while trying to stake them. So instead, get your plant supports in the spring. Place them early while your plant is still small. It's much, much easier that way. Ask me how I know. I have been there. You can use metal plant rings, bamboo stakes, or even DIY supports like branches for vines like sweet peas and beans. You can put trellising up before planting so you don't have to disturb the roots later. I actually have an entire video about plant staking that I'll leave a link to in the description below, so you can check that out as well if you want to see how I do it in my own garden. And of course, putting the right plant in the right place is important. I don't think this is specific to spring, but I thought it was important enough to mention. Just because a plant looks good at the nursery does not mean it's going to thrive in your garden. So you have to make sure that you're checking the plant's light, soil, and water requirements before you're buying so that you're not creating a headache for yourself. If you have a really, really shady yard, sun-loving plants are not going to do well no matter how much you love them, and vice versa. Shade plants in the full sun are going to crisp up and get burnt by the sun rays. And just know that this also isn't really an exact science. I have some plants that say that they're full sun, and I have them growing in partial shade and they're doing fine. So that's where the trial and error part of gardening comes in, which can be a really fun process if you just accept that Mother Nature has her own plans for you and you can't always control everything to a T. So just being open to experimenting and using a little bit of trial and error to move plants around until you find the right spot for them can really help you prevent a lot of headaches moving forward. My next tip is to create a sun map so that you're planting smart. One of the biggest mistakes I see gardeners make is really just not paying attention to sunlight at all. You plant a sun-loving flower in the morning sun thinking it'll be fine, only to realize that by mid-afternoon it's sitting in absolute full shade and it's not really thriving. So before planting, take a day or two to observe how sunlight moves throughout your yard. Watch where the sun hits in the morning, in the midday, in the evening. If you're not sure how to do this, try taking a few photos at different times of the day. It will help to give you more of a visual guide of how much light each spot gets. You can take those photos and then go back to them later and just kind of observe and see how the sun is moving through your property. This is super important because even if a plant is labeled full sun or part shade, those terms can be a little bit tricky and ambiguous to understand. Full sun generally means that a space is getting at least 6 hours of direct sunlight. Part shade typically means that a plant needs morning sun, but it also needs protection from harsh afternoon sun. So knowing this can save you from planting in the wrong spot or having to move things later. I'll be doing a video on this very soon about how to create a sun map for your garden, so make sure that you're subscribed so that you can catch that video and see the exact process that I'm using when I'm doing this for clients or even in my own yard. It's been a highly requested video, so I'm really excited to put that one together for you next. I hope that these tips help you to make the most of your spring planting. If you're wondering, how do I implement all of these things and what do I exactly do next? I know I've been there where I get these tip videos and then I'm like, all right, I just watch it and then I never do anything. So here are 3 great resources that can help you with your next steps. If you really want to nail down your garden style and your plant choices, I'd highly recommend you start by watching my garden styles video. I'm going to leave a link to it right here for you. And if you want to take that garden style video a step further, definitely check out my garden style mood board workshop to bring your vision to life and create a really unique space that's unique to you and what you like, and just make your life easier when you're trying to choose plants and different features for your garden. And if you're ready to just start planting a garden that blooms all year long, you're interested in this continuous blooming, sequential blooming that I'm talking about, definitely check out my Design Your Forest Season Garden course. That's perfect for you. So the links are all below. And like I said, I'm going to leave the garden style video right here, and I'll see you over there.